Good morning. Welcome to You Can't See That. I'm Greg.
And I'm Al. All right, we are
Hey.
ready this morning. As you can see, my Trump flag behind me. Woo! It's just to irritate you, Greg.
I know.
It's just, I
I know.
know.
Politician worship does irritate me.
Woo! No. Oh well. I'm actually at an undisclosed location, way below the earth,
Mm.
about 30 feet underground.
I watched Bishop Jackson live for about 20 minutes before we did this. He was doing a Bible study on his YouTube channel this morning.
Really? How is it?
Oh, it's great. I mean, it's just him sitting at his desk in front of the camera, giving you a Bible lesson. It's great.
Yeah. Now that's E.W. Jackson, the one that you worked with, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
It's amazing to me when these guys that I think are really good don't win. And he did win the nomination. You did a great job helping him in that convention. But when they don't win the final thing, that God has other things for them to do that I think their accomplishments are even greater. So kudos to that. I'll have to listen one day. I'd love to hear.
All right, so we teased
But
the title of this broadcast as what did Trump get right? I think is what I called it.
yeah, something like
I
that.
think that was what you were bringing us. So you did some research. What
So
did you find?
yeah. Well, so let's talk like this. So let's set up the discussion in the right way first, though, because I think there's some things that we may be insinuating that I don't really feel and that are not true. Like, I don't think, one person comes in and he does everything right. As I told last time, I think we always elect people that are frail, that are ignorant on a lot of things, and that stumble through life and stumble through issues and all that, and we make them do the right thing. I think that's the best we got. I've never seen anybody that comes in and they just knowingly on their own, because there are a lot of pressures. You know it. And from my small 4 years in local government, I realized what happens, that you're not working in a little vacuum where you can just do whatever you want and everything gets done. I look at my 4 years, I accomplished nothing. So you'd say, well, hey, after Al did 4 years as county supervisor, was Roanoke County any better? No. In fact, it got worse. But I pushed out and I went on the air saying what I thought was right, but I had very limited power to really do anything, unfortunately. So
Well,
having
and
said, the other thing is, and
that.
here's the second point is, and I put this Trump sign just to irritate Greg this morning, but I agree. I am not into worshiping local, state, federal politicians. They are supposed to be public servants, and for the most part, they are not. Um, I find very few people that actually sacrifice themselves to do the right thing. So, having said those two things, and I do see the trajectory as downward in our, going away from the Constitution. What I do see, and maybe I have some optimism, is I see a couple little blips that if the American people would catch on, they could make a change. But so many times they're asleep and they're just thinking that the politician's going to do it. So those three things I'm in agreement with you on. But I think there were some accomplishments that Trump did. And I don't want to throw everything out because he's just another politician, really didn't get anything done. I think he did some things that were very good, even in his rhetoric, that at least put it out into the public airwaves and told Congress, don't go on this area because I'm going to veto it. And he gave them that warning, even though he may not have been totally like a constitutional guy. He did say some things, and he did surround himself, I think, with some good people that I hadn't seen a president surround himself with before. So, but I'll leave that to you. So that's kind of the premise I'm coming in on this with.
Right. Well, I don't disagree. He didn't do some stuff right. He did.
Mm-hmm.
I agree the trajectory is a continual downward spiral. it's just that the point is we either do something that has a reasonable chance of affecting the change we're talking about, or we don't. And who we elect hasn't seemed to change that trajectory. That's why I keep saying that electing one person or the other, or involvement in elections is not going to solve the issue we have. It's because no matter who we elect, the downward spiral continues. And sure, electing one person or another has its various positives. There was some stuff from electing Trump that was positive, but it didn't change the trajectory. We still are worse. We're still worse off. And I get, you're the only solution to this problem you'll accept is just continuing to engage the system the way the system is. But my point is that doesn't have, obviously from evidence, that doesn't have any chance of actually working. So if you're doing that because you like it, well, that's one thing. But if you're doing it because you think it has a reasonable chance of working at some point, well, that's what I'm talking about. I have yet to see evidence that the status quo of political activity has a reasonable chance of achieving the goal. Our goal seems to be the same. And we don't, it's just, that's why I don't do politics anymore. I mean, after 30 years, I discovered none of that changed it. It didn't matter whether I was doing it or not.
Right.
No one's political activity in the standard methods that they teach us are what we're supposed to do in our society made a difference. So if it's never going to make a difference doing that, I don't see the point to doing it unless you just like doing it. Many people love getting involved in politics. They love telling people about it. They love arguing about it. They love knocking on doors, and they love going to meetings, and they love hearing speeches, and they love getting invested in a candidate and working really, really hard. And they enjoy the stuff. They like marches, and they like getting petitions signed. They get up in the morning. They're so excited to engage in that stuff. And that's great if you do it because you like it. But if you're doing that stuff because it's going to restore liberty, then that's not a rational, logical conclusion. It's just...
Okay. So let me ask you this question, though. So our system of government is very... it's made so that things happen slowly. Would you agree?
Yeah. Okay. There were a lot of roadblocks put into our republic to prevent quick change. And
correct.
Without that, we would be where we are now. We'd be there 200 years ago. If
correct. But to go back the other way, I think it's going to be the same thing a little bit because, you may have a president get voted in and you think, okay, this guy, he's saying some things, and then the Senate and the Congress change and he can't, it's frustrating. Or you have governors, they change, or you have state legislatures, and it's always, this thing is just constantly fluid, and you're like, gosh, just freeze it in this group of people or this Congress and this president, and let's see if we can do something, but you can't.
Right.
So on purpose, and I like it that way, although it does frustrate me on some issues. I wish we could change overnight because I think they're criminal, like gun laws, right? We've been going on a slow slide, and you want overnight to change them. Now, I went to the Heritage Institute. I tried to find some places where people gave honest opinion of how good Trump was with guns. And the Heritage Foundation, which, at the time, it used to be kind of the stalwart. Now, everybody gets a little more liberal. But I also went to the American, the Second Amendment Foundation. The Federalist wrote a piece, and they gave him kind of a mixed review. On some things like the bump stocks that you were talking about, a fail. And they said he definitely failed in that.
Well, remember though, something like that's not just a failure. It's a violation. Trump correct. Might as well have come to your correct. House, hit you upside the head with a hammer, and taken your property from you, because that's what he did by signing that order. I mean, that's not just a little thing. That's a big thing. But anyway, that's That's off
I got
topic.
you.
That's
No,
off topic.
And I would totally agree with you. I mean, the way we have to talk about these things, though, we almost have to be detached a little bit just to look down at it. I don't know any other way to do it. This has been happening so often that I'm trying to like look at it and say, okay, what's going on? But he definitely, Trump. They said that he did more good than bad. Now you're not going to like that because, right, if you do one thing bad in violation, but you're trying to maybe
okay. So you can probably make a mathematical determination that he did more good than bad if you remove the fact, if you don't consider everything he didn't do anything about. So you've got this massive of bad things. He didn't touch it, right? And then there's the stuff he did do, and this part of it was bad, and this part of it was good, and there was more good than bad. So if you separate out everything he didn't even bother addressing, all that bad stuff, which is a lot, which dwarfs what he actually did deal with, then sure, you could say he actively did more good things than bad things. But if you say, okay, let's add all this other stuff back in, here's everything he didn't even touch. Well, that gets added to the bad because inactivity is still a choice. Choosing not to do something about something is still a choice, and he chose not to do something about the massive negative, horrible policy that we have in existence. So in aggregate, I don't think you can say he did more good than bad because there's all that stuff he wouldn't even touch, wouldn't do anything.
But I guess there were some things that he could have touched and got past that would have been bad also, and he did not.
Well,
which a lot of other presidents have done.
You don't get
I
credit for not doing the bad stuff. I mean, come on.
Well, but everybody has been. And I guess that's one thing I got to credit him a little bit is like he's not going after the Second Amendment to destroy it like a lot of other presidents have been. He gave everybody a little time of breathing.
Sure.
Right, to create a beachhead a little bit to start moving the other way. And I think his rhetoric was usually positive Second Amendment, which is a lot to say from all these other presidents that seem to kowtow to the pressure of it.
Well, no, basically what you're telling me is he said one thing and did another. He said he was the Second Amendment's best friend, and then he wrote an illegal executive order to steal your Second Amendment rights. So sure, the rhetoric was
a portion of that right.
Yeah.
Right.
So sure, the rhetoric was good, but that sounds like run-of-the-mill politicians lying. Hey, man, you can trust me. I'm the Second Amendment's best friend. Let's get rid of your bump stock. You didn't see me do that. That's run-of-the-mill politicians lying straight to your face, Al. I mean, I get that hearing him say good things made you happy, but if you're lying to people and saying good things while you do this horrible thing that's opposite of what you're telling people, that's not good. That's actually bad.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. But, when we look at the Second Amendment, I think there are parts of the Second Amendment. Now, if you start eroding it, I get it. It's not good. But it's not like he said, yeah, I'm standing for your Second Amendment, then he took it away. I mean, he stood for the Second Amendment, but he's probably ignorant and came under pressure on parts. I get it, Greg. I mean, I'm totally with you. I have discussions with my friends all the time about the Second Amendment. I mean, I think everybody should have a gun. No one should be able to watch or register them. It's your right to have it. And if you commit a crime with it, then we ought to throw the book at you. But until you do, you're free to own a gun, and no one should know what you got. I'm totally with you on that. The other thing I would just say, and just to do this, is that, he did select 3 Supreme Court justices that in total are more favorable to the Second Amendment in their views. And I read something about Judge Amy Coney Barrett, and this was actually before she was the nominee, that when she was sitting on the Seventh Circuit Court, she had a strong dissent in taking guns away from a felon when he was, non-violent felons. They wanted to remove their guns. Well, she dissented from that. She's a little bit strong on the Second Amendment, according to the Second Amendment Foundation, according to the Heritage Foundation, and he selected her. So there are some things that he's put in place and some of the judges and some of the people on the Supreme Court that are more favorable.
Well, we don't know. We don't know if that choice is favorable until we have a ruling in court, because oftentimes our Supreme Court justices, and we'll just stick with the ones that are picked by Republicans, they sell them to us just the way you sell me Barrett just now. Well, here's her rating with Heritage, and here's her rating blah, 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 and here's this case, and here's that case, and so we got a good conservative judge. And then they get on the court, and then they say Obamacare is a tax, and it's constitutional, even though that the history is wrong. So it may be the best choice he had, but we can't say that we've created a pro Second Amendment court until we see a case, and then we'll find out what kind of court we really have.
All right,
and usually what we find out is we don't have the court that we were told we had.
Right.
None of these people.
Nuances.
The only judge.
Nuances. He did select somebody that could have had evidence of not being for the Second Amendment.
Well, we don't know. Did you research? We don't know. Did you research every judgment she's ever made, or did you just trust somebody else to do that for you?
Well, what I brought up was a couple of websites that are more conservative.
Okay, yeah. So, I mean, I get it.
It's the best I can do.
No, the best you could do was to actually go research all of her judgments yourself.
All of her judgments, yeah.
That may not be reasonable. I mean, I get that, but that's the best you could do.
I look at this one case. This is an interesting case where you put a lifetime ban on gun ownership for nonviolent felons. Well, that's interesting how they were going for that, and she dissented. I thought, well, gosh, normally the pressure would be, these are criminals, you shouldn't have guns. But I don't know. In that case, it seemed like, and she says, here's your thing, noting that founding-era legislators did not strip felons of the right to keep and bear arms simply because of their status as felons, but only when they judged that doing so was necessary to protect the public safety. I mean, so she's putting in some words that just because your status as a felon, and I think where we're going now under Biden is, I mean, they're, what's that, the red alert or whatever these things are. I mean, they're just trying to get everybody's guns taken away.
Red flag laws.
Red flag laws.
All right. Well, we won't know yet. The only from looking back historically, the only Supreme Court justice that has turned out being the person that we were sold they were is Clarence Thomas.
Yes.
Every other one of these judges, even the ones that Reagan gave us, have all turned out to be lukewarm at best.
What about the other judge? Alito. Is it Alito?
Alito is not bad.
Hardly hear about him, but he seems to vote with Clarence all the time.
He's not bad. And then the one they murdered a few years ago at that hunting camp down in Texas, he was pretty good. Which but
that could be. I guess that's the next show. The murder of Scalia.
Don't you remember? Like he woke up he didn't wake up and they found a pillow on his head in the morning. He was dead. That was weird. Anyway,
next show on that one. All right. The next thing I would talk about is just education. Because I'm a homeschool person. So Betsy DeVos is Secretary of Education. Now, he could have picked anybody. Betsy DeVos had a history in her own private life being very pro get federal government out. Now,
and Betsy was fine.
Yeah. Now you could say, well, he didn't eliminate the Department of Education, which
he could have.
I think they should, right? But she did. But boy, was she. Sometimes I look at how viciously they are attacked by the left, and if anybody was, it was Betsy DeVos. So she put in trying to remove funding from the Department of Education, trying to take away money from public schools, all that kind of stuff is a list of things that she tried to do. She was being, interrogated every which way. Her family was being interrogated. So I'm thinking, wow, Trump, I mean, he took a lot of heat for that, but did move in that direction, which Hillary Clinton, I mean, it would have been worse. Now,
no, but the end result is the same. It wouldn't have mattered.
Because again, moving parts, you have a lot of different pieces.
Yeah. I mean, she was fine, but what I saw was Trump picked somebody that is like us when it comes to their belief in public education. And
right.
he let her go off and achieve nothing, raise a lot of hell, cause a lot of trouble so that he wouldn't have to. So that he could say, hey, I did my fight against public education. Betsy was there, but in the end,
do you think that's what he really did, or is this the way our process
I don't
works?
know. I don't know what his actual in his head, what he was actually trying to do. I'm just characterizing the reality of what happened. This is what happened: is Trump delegated doing something about education to her, stuck her in a position, let her take all the heat, let her raise all the hell. He totally ignored anything he could actually do, because there were things Trump could have actually done, but instead of doing those things, he let her run off, cause a lot of trouble, get yelled at, be made fun of, have 4 years of pure hell in the Department of Education, and then now he's gone, she's gone, they're there. We're no better off than we were 4 years ago. Sure, he could have chosen somebody that would have furthered the goals of centrally controlled government education, and he didn't. He chose somebody who doesn't believe in that. I get that, but I'm not talking. But what I'm talking about in all these things are what is the end result. That's all that matters.
Okay, so let me ask you this question, and you can educate me on this. If we have an unfair expectation of what the end should be, then we never meet it, and we're always frustrated. So a fair idea of what a end expectation should look like, I think is reasonable to say. After 4 years of Trump, could he really have eliminated the Department of Education?
Oh, sure.
He could have. How would he have done that?
You write an executive order that fires all the employees of that department, shuts down the building, discontinues operations, and folds the money back into the general fund for Congress to reallocate.
So Trump can fire people
they work for him. If you are an executive branch employee, you work for President Trump, and he can hire and fire his employees till the cows come home.
Right. So he fires the head of the Department of Education. He fires the boss.
No, he fires them all.
Can he fire specific employees?
You can fire the whole department. You furloughed the entire Department of Education. It doesn't exist anymore. There's no structure. There's no money. You shut down the bank accounts. You put the building up for sale. Whatever. You have the authority to do that. I mean, if somebody in their head thinks that they can write an executive order that violates the Second Amendment and takes property away from private citizens, then why wouldn't they be able to actually write an executive order that controls the executive branch of government? That's what you're supposed to write executive orders for. Executive orders don't exist in a legitimate world where you can create law and boss citizens around through executive order. Executive orders are to administer the executive branch functions, and shutting down the Department of Education, which is an executive branch function, is something you can do in an executive order.
Well, I'd love to see how you do that. And again, I'm not into, like, would we have chaos? I mean, how would that actually work? You must have.
Why would there be chaos?
Well, because I mean, there are contracts in place. I mean, just all the legal stuff around it. You just say tomorrow we don't have it anymore. I mean, how is that? I mean, I'm in for investigating.
Well, sure.
Is that really possible?
And if there are contractual obligations that need to be reconciled in the court system, then we have a Department of Justice with lawyers that can go deal with that. There are plenty of lawyers that work for the president. They can take care of that.
Well, okay. I mean, I'm interested in if that actually, I mean, we say it, if it actually could be done where President Trump just says, it's gone. I ignore you all now for the next 4 years. You don't exist anymore. You all are fired. See you later. Technically, how does that work out? But all right, so let's move on to something else. So education was one that I thought he put somebody in place, at least that, I mean, she wasn't just pretending. She was going after it. The other thing was immigration. So I think one of definitely the number one role of government, well, maybe number two. I mean, number one is to protect our rights, right? The rights that God-given rights. Government needs to protect it. Now, the other thing is to protect the country itself. I mean, defend our country, right? So that we can actually have those rights and they mean something. That's correct? I would say you agree with that. That's kind of what you're saying. Okay. So the border, immigration, the whole thing. I mean, the one thing that he got skewered over was his handling of saying illegal immigration, build the wall, start protecting it. It seemed like he was trying about as hard as he could to get some funding to do the wall. And from what I heard and what I've read is he did build 400 miles of wall. Is that true or not? Maybe it's not.
I've seen that number, and then I've also had someone say the 400-mile number includes repaired fence, not brand new fence. So I don't know for sure if we're talking about 400 miles of brand new fencing where there was no fence, or 400 miles of some new fence and some repaired fence. I don't know.
Do you think he wanted to remove or be strict on illegal immigration, or was he one that because I think that's definitely a liberty. You know, when he does that, it does protect my liberty and my freedoms, because illegal immigration does a lot of havoc to the economy and to just our safety. Was he good? I mean, what grade would you give him in terms of his effort plus accomplishing the most that he could through a Congress? I mean, again, I don't know if he has an executive right to just do it without any congressional approval.
Well,
because it's already in the Constitution, right? You're not allowed to be here without approval. I mean, that's already criminal activity.
The Constitution doesn't actually create that immigration law. The Constitution delegated the immigration policy to Congress.
But it does say that if you're here without the wording of it, because I remember using this county supervisor meeting, that if you're here without a consent or approval, it's a criminal act.
Yeah, but that's not in the Constitution. That's just part of the code.
Okay.
Yeah, the Constitution in Article 1, Section 8 gives the power of immigration and naturalization to Congress. And that's really all that's there. Now, there is in the 14th Amendment, there's a few little words that were snuck in there that is why people make a claim on being a citizen if you're born here. Even if your parents weren't citizens, even if you snuck across the border to have the baby, they're claiming that this one phrase in the 14th Amendment grants automatic citizenship if you're born here. Now it doesn't, because immigration law doesn't say that, but that's where they make a constitutional case for, if your mom can just make it across the border before she gives birth to you, you're automatically a citizen. That's the argument based on wording in the 14th Amendment. Now the law doesn't reflect that. It never reflected that. The intentions never reflected that. It's another one of those things where people with a selfish political idea they want to push have manipulated what's out there to make you think that their claim is legitimate.
But according to code, though, we're saying, though, that it is a criminal offense to be in the United States illegally.
Correct.
Okay. So all you have to do is follow our law, and those all should be criminal. Do you think that
it maybe? I mean, sure, because I think those are legitimate laws. However, you can't just say that anything that's a law, somebody's criminal if they break it. I mean, that there's, because you've got to separate the morality and the legality. They're not the same thing. It was legal to segregate blacks in the South in the 50s. That doesn't mean it was right. That doesn't mean that segregation law was legitimate, but it was the law. And people who violated it, blacks who didn't abide by that, were criminally prosecuted and punished for it. but that was illegitimate. They never should have been. It should have never been the law. It wasn't a legitimate law, and the people who were prosecuted under it were wrongly prosecuted under that law. So you can't just apply the law as the right and wrong of every situation in these things, because oftentimes the law itself is illegal or itself immoral. And
gotcha. Okay, I'll go with you on that.
Now, I'm not saying immigration law is that, but the reason you can't just say they've done something wrong because the law said so. You got to differentiate good law and bad law in doing that.
Okay, so let's go based on that. Do you think that Trump, was he pretending? Was he not doing everything in his power?
No, I think Trump really meant it on immigration. I think that was an area where he was honest about his intentions. He actually cared about that issue to the level that he behaved.
And for what reason do you think he did?
That he cared
about immigration, illegal immigration?
I think he's witnessed all of the destruction that's happened in American civilization as a result of illegal immigration, and he can tell that that's the final nail in the coffin, probably. I mean, if you dump a whole lot of people who aren't us into this country, give them rights, give them money, and give them the right to vote, the country's done.
The country's done. I would agree.
I mean, that's borders, language, and culture. That's what creates a civilization. Borders, language, and culture. And if you don't have borders, then your political enemies bring in people who don't share your language and your culture to take you down. And they
can't assimilate fast enough.
And that's what we've been watched. That's what we've been. They don't want to assimilate, Al. It's not that they can't assimilate. The people who are coming here, those people that are coming here, in large part, are not coming here to assimilate to constitutional governance, to American civilization the way it was created. They've come here to milk the resources. They've come here just to survive. They've come here to reclaim land for Mexico. They've come here to spread Islam so there can be an Islamic takeover. All these people are coming for a lot of different reasons, and most of those reasons are not to assimilate into American culture. That's why people came here in the 1920s and 30s.
Correct. And we brought them in slow enough to where we could assimilate them. And immigration itself is a great thing. We still had a civilization that resembled what the Constitution had on paper. We hadn't strayed so far that we're a completely different civilization now. In the 20s and 30s of the last century, there was something to assimilate to. But imagine if, let's say you do want to immigrate to the United States, all right? And it's not purely selfish in that you want to go somewhere where you believe you have a way to live a full life and to be prosperous. Besides that, so you come here with the idea, how do you assimilate? We no longer even agree on what American civilization is. Are you going to assimilate with the Trump people? Are you going to assimilate with the left? Are you going to assimilate with Black Lives Matter ideas? Which version of the United States of America is a newcomer who wants to assimilate? What are they going to assimilate to? You can't even tell what kind of country we are anymore. We're a lockdown police state with very few rules, with a centralized government that runs everything and lies to people and kills them. Yeah.
That's basically where we're at today. What is an honest immigrant to do in that situation? Because a lot of the immigrants I talk to, they'll look at me and they go, I read the Constitution and I'm looking at how I don't understand. I don't understand how this is the law. If this is the law, and I'm like, yeah, you're right. I mean, some of them are pretty smart, and many of them came from places where they've already done the thing that people are trying to do to us. And they show up and go, you don't want to be doing this, people. Trust me. I lived there. I'm escaping it. Don't
go there.
Don't do it. But we're doing it. We're going to do this thing, man.
All right. So I'm just going to leave immigration. I think that Trump, and you agree. I mean, he definitely saw that, I think, and it looked like he spent a lot of capital on the illegal immigration issue. The final one I want to talk about, which, it's the whole healthcare thing. And I know the Obamacare, I mean, the best you could find is that, Trump kind of took some things like the mandate out and any tax penalty out. He was maybe taking little pieces. You're stating that from last week that, he could have done it in one full swoop. It'd been gone. I tried to investigate.
He could have done the same thing. He could have done the same thing with that I was suggesting he do with the Department of Education.
Yeah.
Essentially.
So
now
I have to investigate that more. I don't see anywhere where any of the websites that I would go to say that's possible. So
because the status quo of political thought today doesn't account for these foundational realities of our republic. What the stuff I'm telling you he could do, nobody smart is going to tell you that can be done, because we've walked so far away from how this is actually written down on paper that you're right. Nobody's going to do it. That doesn't mean it can't be done, and it doesn't mean it's not right to be done, but you are going to find almost no one of authority who is going to look you in the eye and say, "Oh yeah, you could do that." They're going to tell you can't do it, and they're wrong.
So let me just add this. So when I look at Trump, when he was president, he did several things which everybody told him the world was going to explode if he did it. One was moving the capital to Jerusalem, Israel. Okay. They said the world, it would end. It would automatically end. The next thing was, don't remove us from the climate accords, the Paris Climate Accords. The world will end. The next one was the Iran nuclear deal. Don't do it because. So I never viewed Trump. Trump, it seemed like he was not in that paradigm. You could tell him the world is going to blow up if you do it, and he just did it.
Well, because he knew that wasn't true. I mean, Trump, like us, knew that those things were not going to end the world, that those were things we should have done already.
I gotcha. So on some of these things, when we discuss it right now and we say that, people say you can't do it, it seemed like Trump, unless he was just lying, that, maybe he didn't want Obamacare to go away. It seems funny that he just wouldn't have done it. Whatever he had the power to do, he would have done it because he knew that the world wasn't going to explode.
Well, I'm sure that he had a team of bar certified lawyers tell him he can't do what I'm telling you can do.
When did he listen to that? I mean, his history.
He picks and chooses when he listens to them.
Yeah, I got you. But a lot of times history shows that I don't care what you guys say, I'm doing it.
Sometimes.
It's funny on a few issues.
And that's how you know whether or not it's really important to him. Because when they told him he couldn't do the stuff on the border, he said, "Screw you, I'm doing it anyway." When they told him you couldn't do what I said about Obamacare and the Department of Education, he went, "Yeah, okay, maybe you're right about that." That's how you can tell what he really, in his heart, what he really cares about, because he'll go ahead, if he really cares about it, he'll do it no matter how many people tell him no.
I know, which is strange to me that, especially on education.
It just wasn't as.
I think he's a fan of government education.
Those things were just not as important as his rhetoric during the campaign would lead you to believe, and that's normal. Politicians just do that. It's just how it works. It's not unique to Trump.
The other thing it could be is that you have so much capital and you have so much actual capability to do 10 things at once. He picks immigration, which I think is probably number one, because if you don't protect our nation, forget about all the rights. Immigration, illegal immigration is key to me. So I probably would have had that as maybe my number one priority too. Although I would have probably had education big time in 4 years. I would have made every stride possible to get us out of government education, because I think that's the second thing that's going to demise our country is our education system. All right. But anyway, so those, I like it. So that's the thing with Trump, I think, on especially those issues like healthcare, immigration, school choice. The other one that maybe helped a lot was they did talk about his tax cuts. And I was looking at some things about what he did for married couples with lower incomes, things like that really gave them a lot more money of their own money back again, which I'm thinking it's either that's a fraud, like that really isn't what happened, that he didn't allow people to keep more of their own money, or he did. Now, from everything I investigated, he did allow people to keep more of their own money. What would you say? Did he or not? I mean, can you tell in your own pocketbook, were you able to keep more of the money that you rightfully earned, or do you not know? Or is it?
My tax situation didn't change.
Because it seemed like there were a lot of things for entrepreneurs
didn't really
that they
change.
could do some things.
But my guess is that whatever micromanaging he did with the tax code probably reduced the taxes from one group of people or another. I mean, yeah. I mean, I'm sure. I'm sure he had a an effect on the tax situation that was at least a slight benefit. But I don't.
Well, business taxes went from 35% to 21%.
Yeah.
He definitely came after that when he first came, which I think is a freedom thing, a liberty thing. Not like somebody. I mean, we should have those.
Right, but the tax. But you realize that it's again, when I'm talking about the downward spiral, I'm not saying that along the way some good things don't happen. So taxes going down for a brief period of time are not a systematic piece of systematic evidence showing improvement. It's just showing that while we're declining, this one thing got a little better for 4 years. And taxes are one of those things that go back and forth. So typically, and this goes all the way back to the 19th century, you can almost always see Republicans get elected, taxes go down, Democrats get elected, taxes go up. That's kind of a back and forth. Now, I'll tell you that while it has gone back and forth, it used to go back and forth down here, and now it goes back and forth up here. So because of and that's what I'm saying about the downward spiral is in aggregate, it's not getting better. It's getting worse and worse and worse. But along that pathway to worse, it gets better, it gets worse, it gets better, it gets worse. But if you look at tax rates today and tax rates 100 years ago, we're so much worse. I mean, it's the difference in a few points and tens of points. And given another 100 years of that fluctuation, we'll be fluctuating at another level even higher than we are now. That's just been the trend since the early 20th century.
But there was a time, wasn't it, when Reagan took over the rates for high income earners? And I view all earners the same. I don't care if you're high or low. Just because you're a high income earner doesn't mean the government should take more of your money.
I think Reagan reduced the top income bracket larger than any president in the history of, at least in our lifetime, any of them have. Reagan did the great positive. Reagan did the biggest. I think people should keep more of their money no matter what bracket they're in, right? I mean, just because you're wealthy doesn't mean you should be giving more money. Most likely, if you're wealthy, you hardly use any government services. Well, and going forward, we may not see dramatic increases in taxes, except where they're trying to use the tax rates to manipulate people's behavior. But they're not. I don't see us using the tax rates to actually try to fund the government properly, because now that they are so okay with printing money or borrowing money, they're not going to care all that much about tax revenue. Because if you need $1.9 trillion, Al, today, you don't worry about raising it through taxes. You just print it, which is what they just did a few weeks ago. They did it last fall. We've been on ever since the 2008 market crash. The tax rate has been a lot less about raising money the government actually needs as it has been about manipulating one group of people or another, because they'll just borrow or print whatever money they need.
That topic, actually, I would love to have that topic for a show. The printing of money, borrowing of money, what does it really mean on a show? My last point with Trump to kind of end up is deregulation. Everywhere I looked, it seemed like Trump went through the regulations. He asked his people to go through all the regulations that are in for whatever it is and eliminate. And supposedly for every new one, 8 had to be removed. I mean, there were these numbers that kept showing up. And it seemed like a lot of the left got so upset of all these deregulations, removing of regulations from doing anything. Do you think that was positive? It seemed like it was a positive leaning on that area.
He did reduce some regulations, but don't don't try to measure Trump's amount of work or effect on something by how angry the left gets about what he's doing. Because remember, we're in this cycle where it doesn't matter what gets done, right? Indignation to the nth degree is the response. So they're going to scream bloody murder and attack like it's the end of the world, even if it's the slightest little thing, because that's where we're at right now, is when you need to get your people motivated to hate your political enemy, you embellish the negatives, right? So Trump, if Trump had reduced 100 regulations, they'd tell their people it was 10,000 and have them screaming like it was the end of the world. And so if you use their rhetoric as a gauge of Trump's actual work, you're going to be off the mark, because they screamed 100 times worse than anything he ever did.
All right. Although I got one stat that said from the Federal Register that he removed 25,000 pages of regulations, where the previous administration, Obama, just to put it in context, the Obama administration added over 16,000 pages. Trump removed 25,000 pages. So
yeah, I don't doubt it.
And I mean, there may be 1 million pages. Who
knows?
There's
millions of pages.
But at least he instead of a 2-for-1, it says he did an 8-for-1 in terms of getting out old regulations, new ones. It's a path in the right direction, and most presidents.
No, it's not. Wait a second. That's not necessarily a path in a different direction.
Well, a departure from the old direction.
No, it's not even a departure. It's, again, good things can happen on the pathway to destruction. It doesn't mean that you're on a different path. It just meant that not everything that happens every moment of the day is bad. It doesn't mean you're on a new path.
Okay, hold on a minute.
This
may be where if you have a ship going in one direction, there is no way you make it 180. You just don't. You got to turn it.
I'm not saying that. You're arguing something I didn't say. What I said is that something good happening on the pathway to destruction is in and of itself is not evidence of a new path. If you've got a boat and your boat is on its way to hell, and that's where it's going to go, and steering it somewhere else requires this amount of something, but on the way to hell, you have some good days. Some days they don't kill as many people. One day there was a coup, and they took over the engine room, right? But the boat still was on its way to hell. Those good days are not themselves evidence of a change in pathway.
Their evidence may be of a that somebody's aware of something, and we're trying desperately to turn it. Okay.
We're always aware, and people are always trying. My point is that what keeps getting tried is a failure. It's never worked, and something else needs to be done. That's the whole point here. And I get that you think if you just keep trying the same thing, maybe one day it'll work. It may take 5,000 years, and it might work. Well, it might. I don't know, but
I'm just saying, in a country of laws, you do the things within the laws to get things fixed.
Which laws, though?
And it's
which laws? Which laws are we going to follow, and which laws are we going to defy because they're illegal? You can't just use a country of laws to govern this, because that's the whole point. Is that we've got a mass of law that is illegitimate, is hurtful to human beings, is abusive, and is not within the actual legitimate authority of the government that is enforcing those laws. Yeah. And that's not a situation that an election has ever changed. I mean, we've changed a law, and like you said with Trump, this stuff happened and this other stuff happened, but today we're still heading the same spot we were headed the day before Trump took office. We're headed there faster. Last year was like stomping the gas. I mean, you lived through 2020. You saw what they did, and you see what they're doing with it. This is an incredibly powerful thing, and it fits right in line with the continual downward spiral. Trump got elected in this situation. That's unbelievable. He did some stuff that was really good. However, we're still on the same path. We're on it faster than we were 5 years ago. And so
you're talking about the COVID 2020, the whole COVID.
I'm talking about everything and all the new election laws that they created that allow the fraud as a result of COVID and all this other stuff. I mean, they last year allowed them to dig their fingers even deeper and take a larger grasp of power over us and the ability to manipulate people. Last year was earth-shattering when it comes to taking a step forward in that direction. I mean, and it's, so was terrorism. I mean, terrorism was a vehicle that allowed the Republicans to create all kinds of unconstitutional law. I mean, look at the Patriot Act. We now have surveillance without a judicial order. We've got, people being molested at airports because your bottled water might be a bomb. The Republicans did the same thing to us with terrorism that the Democrats are doing to us with COVID. They're using it as a way to increase the authority, power, and scope of governmental control.
Well, and Greg, with that, so one day we probably need to talk about the whole terrorism thing, because how would you have dealt with terrorism? And as President Greg Aldridge, knowing that borders now, people come in and they're putting off explosives, flying planes. How do you deal with it? How do you try to find out what people are doing or wanting to do to destroy you?
I don't know.
That's a good question. Someone's got to deal with it.
I wouldn't have stolen all of the surveillance camera footage around the Pentagon that might have proved an airplane actually hit the Pentagon. I think if I were president, I would have released that footage and let everybody see it. Instead of
a plane actually hit the Pentagon? Or we think
no, it looks like a missile hit the Pentagon, but they're claiming a plane hit the Pentagon. And all the surveillance cameras in the entire area on the parking lots and all that would show us what exactly happened was all sequestered and classified. So we can't see the surveillance footage that supposedly would prove an airplane, not a missile, hit the Pentagon. So if I were president, I would release that footage.
And if it wasn't a missile, what's the difference?
So
if
we
the
can
missile,
stop.
We're saying.
Well, because if it's a missile, then we got lied to, and the 9/11 report is a fraud, and the entire story of hijacking a plane and crashing it into the Pentagon falls apart. Something else happened. If a missile got shot, if one of our missiles got shot at the Pentagon, we have a completely different 9/11.
Well, wasn't there a number of the plane, and weren't there people that died that they didn't come home to their families? Like, how would that all be kept a secret? Obviously, the people that were on that plane number 258 that didn't come home, where were they? Where did they?
I don't know.
Well,
all I'm saying is that if I were president, I wouldn't have stolen that footage and hidden it. I would have let it be public, and so people could actually see what happened. So instead of any idea of dissent being called a conspiracy theory where we can't get our hands on what would prove one way or another, then we'd actually know the truth about that situation. But we don't, because George Bush let him hide it and wouldn't do anything about it. But anyway, you just asked what would Greg Aldridge do. Off the top of my head, that's the first thing I would have done. That would answer a lot of questions.
All right. But in terms of, let's say we have terrorism, obviously we have terrorism in America from people outside of America. So how do you deal with terrorism in your country? You let it happen?
Well, two things. You have to deal with the activity of terrorism itself. When being committed, but you also have to deal with the conditions that create that. So maybe it would be beneficial if we didn't have the CIA funding one side of a battle over in the Middle East while the NSA is funding the other side of the battle and fighting with ourselves through a proxy, getting one group killed and another group killed, and the money trail goes back to us. I would not do that. I would not get us involved in trying to manipulate things somewhere else in the world in that kind of underhanded and deceitful way. How could you not create people that hate your guts and want to kill you when you come to their country, arm and fund two opposing groups, and then help them murder each other with your weapons and your money? In what world does that not going to create hate and ill will against you for doing so? I mean, come on. But that's just one part of it. And I'm not saying that everything we're involved in is illegitimate, but we're involved in a whole lot of things that are exactly like that, where we sneak around and try to destabilize a region because it supposedly has some sort of benefit to American security or America's economy or whatever it is. Typically, what those things actually have an effect on are not Americans' freedom or our prosperity. It typically has an effect on one of their friends' business interests in the area. And we're fighting this, and we're funding these people to fight each other and sticking our troops in there to clean up the mess because we're throwing a bone to a friend of ours who has international corporate interests that are now having a problem as a result of whatever destabilization is going on in this particular region that we're going to get involved in. I wouldn't do any of that. See, this is when you have evil people with evil intent, or maybe it's not even pure evil. Maybe they're just selfish and greedy, and it's just the run of the mill, 7 deadly sins. But when you give them the enormous amount of power that we have turned over to our government and then let them use it, it's no mystery what they use it for. We shouldn't be surprised that they're using it to enrich themselves and their friends. They're using it to empower themselves and their friends, and that they're creating a lot of strife and conflict around the world by doing so, because what they're doing is wrong. And they've got the best weapon ever created to do it with.
Well, right. Although the only problem with this conversation, it gets into, what we think is going on. Somebody's getting enriched overseas. The problem is I can't prove any of that, and you can't prove any of that. So we're left with, we've had wars. We've had people since this country has been formed. We've had all kinds of issues happen in America. And I guess.
Well, sure. And to some degree, we find out after the fact about these things, right? So we found out after World War II that Roosevelt knew about the attack on Pearl Harbor ahead of time. Now, if you'd have told somebody back then the president knew and let it happen, they'd have probably put a bullet in your head, Al. But now, 80 years later, we actually know now that that's probably exactly what happened. We'll find out, but it's too far gone. We're not going to deal with it. We're not going to go back and deal with that as a problem and to try to undo all the negative things that happened to people as the result of the president doing something very bad. Same thing in Vietnam. The Gulf of Tonkin incident. It turns out our own Marines fired the missile so that we could say it was a false flag. So we could say the North Vietnamese did it. So we'd have an excuse to go from being observers of the war to actually actively participating. Now, at the time, if you'd have told somebody, Al, that that's what went on, they'd have thought you were some crazy conspiracy theorist. But here we are 60 years later. And now we know, oh my God, that's what happened. That's how the whole thing got started. It was a false flag operation. So let's go forward. We'll find out. We're already finding out that there were no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. It didn't even take 50 years to find that out. We found that out within the first 5.
Well, I'm not buying that. Saddam Hussein had a whole nuclear program that the Israelis bombed to the ground. So there were elements of mass destruction prior. It's hard for me to believe that Saddam Hussein did not have any and they didn't get moved out. So I'm not sure I buy the whole thing that Saddam Hussein did not. I think that's the other side trying to make Bush look like a fool. So
yeah, but if it's true, Bush, there's no way Bush can look like a fool, because you take the weapons, you lay them out on the ground, you point cameras at them, and you say, "We found them. Here we go. Told you so." They never did that. They never did that because they were never there. And you're right. Whatever he did have probably got removed, but it probably got removed before we ever even invaded, because the invasion was not likely really about weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. Remember, wars have been fought since the beginning of time, and profiteers have helped wars get started for their own greed since the beginning of time.
So that's another plus for Trump. No war started.
You're right. He didn't get involved in any of that, and he tried to reduce and end what he could while he was there. I totally agree.
The tough thing is a lot of this stuff. I mean, we can speculate, and I mean, I like listening, because if you can accumulate enough evidence, I mean, you don't want to be dumb. We should do it, but I think things are sometimes more complicated than we may think. But
anyway. That's the other problem, is things are extremely complicated. There are layers after layers of complication over top of everything political in our country. It is,
and it's human.
It's a mess.
Humanity is complicated in a way. So I'm not going to say it's some conspiracy. Several hundred years of history. There's all kind, with 300 something million people on the planet, on our country. It gets confusing. So I got you. Well, it looks like we spent the whole day on my topic. We didn't even get to your topic.
That's all right. I'll erase my topics off of the list, and I'll go back and say what we actually ended up talking about.
Yeah, it's a good conversation. I think, we're looking with Biden now, and I hear some things. It just seems like, but and I do feel that if we'd had 4 more years of Trump, it would have been a lot better than what we have now.
Trump allowed us to swim to the surface for a second and take another breath of air before they shoved our head under and continued drowning us. That's essentially
well, I like that. And if he'd been elected again, I think we would have maybe had a few more breaths.
Yeah.
And maybe some other people would have been more confident and started helping out. I think momentum.
Maybe, but if my concern, not that I wanted Biden to win, but I think the concern about Trump winning the second time should have been, if they were willing to do what they did last year to try to win the election, if they had failed, can you imagine what they would do to us next to go after him? It would have made what they did last year look like child's play.
Yeah, but that's what we're in the fight. I mean, right?
No, we're not in the fight. We're not in the fight. Nobody's fighting. You delegated the fight to somebody you elected, and you let them go fight. You didn't fight.
Yeah, but I'm saying if Trump had gotten reelected and they came after it more vicious, I think that's great. I love the exposure of the left. I think a lot of people were getting a good idea. This left is totally unhinged. I would have loved 4 more years.
I think killing more people in an effort to continue to try to take him down is not a good thing. I don't think setting up a situation where the left steps up their murder and mayhem of innocent people in an attempt to fight Trump is good.
You mean with the COVID thing? What do you mean killing more people?
Well, that's what they did last year. They used COVID. So
yeah, I got you.
So they locked people down. They destroyed their businesses. People committed suicide. I mean, they created death and mayhem and confusion and misery last
Yeah,
year.
but a lot of that is local, though, Greg. It's state and local. It's
Yeah,
not,
but the local people are just implementing what they feel is coming down to them from above.
from the state, more from the state, right?
And the states
but
are.
now you've got Biden, who's implementing federal stuff, which Trump never went near. He didn't implement anything federally, right? I mean, he might not have been as strong.
Yeah,
he
declared a national emergency.
Huh?
He declared a national emergency.
Yeah, but he didn't implement this face mask thing that Biden is doing. He didn't do all that.
It was his CDC that published that everybody is following. So, yeah, he didn't actually say you have to do it, but his department is the one who came up with that policy. It was his CDC. That's an executive branch agency. But
there was conflict between those two. I mean, like I said, I think it's getting more complicated. But Trump himself,
of course, there's conflict. But if you're the guy in charge, you eliminate the conflict by getting rid of those people.
Eliminate Fauci.
Well, sure. Why do you why on earth would you keep somebody around that's going to continue to do the opposite of what you think should be done? Either you don't really want the opposite to be done. It's a cover.
I disagree with you on that. Well, I disagree with you. I think Trump did want the
there's nothing to disagree with. I'm not saying he didn't. What I'm saying is, if you want X to happen and you put somebody in charge that's going to do Y, then either you didn't
already in charge.
Then either you didn't really want X to happen, or you suck at your job.
Or it's a little more complicated than that.
Maybe. He didn't seem to find any he didn't think it was very complicated to criminalize my gun stock. That seemed to be pretty simple. How much harder is it to write something else on an executive order and sign it? I mean, you write, no. You tell them no. They work for you. If you're the president, these people all work for you. Anyway.
Anyways, that was a great discussion. All right, so next Thursday what's today? Tuesday? It is Tuesday.
It is Tuesday. We got to fix the audio problem again, hopefully before Thursday.
Okay.
But it was good to see you this morning.
Same here.
Have fun today.
Right. You do same, buddy.
All right.
We'll talk to y'all later. Thanks.
Bye. Thanks for watching.
Bye-bye.